And we are live. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful Friday. It's April 1st. Watch yourself out there on the internet. Some people like to make jokes this day. April 1st, 2022. And this week we're talking about the new Mac Studio, some iPhone rumors that are kind of interesting, and a little bit about our favorite shortcuts and automations, because this is the iMore show. I am your host, Luke Filipowicz, joined as always by my co-hosts, Karen Freeman and Stephen Warwick. How you doing?
Hello.
Howdy.
And joined by very special guest, Rene Ritchie, the adept Apple analyst himself.
Did he make you say that?
No, I had to come up. I had to come up with an alliteration that I really liked because his name's already an alliteration, and Rene taught me everything I know about alliteration. That's not actually true. My grade 5 English teacher taught me about alliteration, but we'll credit Rene anyways. How you doing, Rene?
Good. It is actually 2 years to the day that I left iMore. So
oh wow, interesting.
Yeah.
We have a celebration later. It's yeah. Don't worry.
Yeah.
We have UK cake. It's boiled, but it's fine.
Yeah. Rene, have you fallen for any April Fool's jokes today so far?
I'm staying off the internet as much as I can.
Wow, okay.
But like the thing is that you can't tell. Like if you look at Elon Musk's Twitter threads, like for the last year, it's April 1st every day. So I don't know how you people cope with it anymore. How do you tell what's even news anymore?
Yeah, I've noticed on my Twitter this morning as I was scrolling through it for various reasons, and I just noticed I was like, I don't think I've seen any big jokes, so maybe I've curated my timeline really well. And that
Marquez had one. He had a short.
Yeah, that's true. I did see the MKBHD one for sure. Diving into it, Rene, we're so happy to have you here because you've been covering the Apple space for longer than
forever.
Than any of us.
Luke, you can say forever.
Forever. And your analysis and your thoughts and your insight into how kind of Apple does things is always greatly appreciated, and it's something I've admired about you for a long time. And so we'll just start it off. I'll ask you right now, how are you enjoying the Mac Studio overall? Has it fit into your workflow very well, or how
he doesn't even have it plugged in?
Right?
No, this is the M1 Max. This is the M1 Max one. The M1 Ultra one is plugged in, sir.
Oh, yeah. So how's it been? How are you liking it? What's your general thoughts?
It's really good. I mean, I don't want to be stereotypical cliched person, but it really is like the Mac Cube, the Mac trash can, Mac Pro done right, like reinvented in a way that maybe it should have always been, not as a replacement for a Mac Pro, because some people still want expansion and PCIe slots and all that sort of thing, but for someone who doesn't care about expanding or updating or hobbying their computer and just wants the most powerful box they can to throw at the gnarliest problems they have, and it does really well at that. It's just M1 Ultra is a freaky beast of interposer technology. There's your quote of the day, Stephen. I gave it to you early.
Thanks.
So have you found that it's like you mentioned that the M1 Ultra is now is currently plugged in. The M1 Max one is sitting there. Have you found the M1 Ultra? Has it dramatically improved your workflow, or is it kind of more of a minor upgrade from the M1 Max from your personal workflow?
Yes and no. And the only reason I'm hedging that way is that it really depends on what your workload is and what your constraints are. So M1 Ultra is very really 2 M1 Max. So like you can get 1.9x on Metal GPU tasks, 1.9x on CPU if you're doing like big builds, things like that. 1.5 on the neural engines, because they're not a single core ML target the way that the GPU are. It does have to send back and forth large scale jobs, so there's a little bit more overhead there. And the media engines are about 1.9 for ProRes, 1.5 for H.264. But the thing is, the jump to M1 Max was so significant. Like for me, it took ProRes times down from like 25, 30 minutes to 5 minutes, 6 minutes. And if you're waiting up at night for the render to finish so you can hit upload and then just go to bed, it doesn't sound like much, but 5 minutes to 25 minutes, or if you're doing longer jobs, like an hour down to 10 minutes, that's really good. The M1 Ultra will have that again, but going from 25 to 5 and then going from 5 to 2.5, it's not a significant a change. So if you're fine with M1 Max, that's great. But there are some people, and like I'm talking not just Pixar and not just ILM, but people who literally like time is money, and the faster they can get things done or the more things they can get done at the same time, And it sounds weird, but you hear this with people doing client work. Like they're doing a music video. I've actually heard people tell me this. They're doing a music video for a famous performer, and that performer literally has 3 minutes on the phone with them and doesn't like the way they're getting jiggy with it at the beginning of the dance and wants you to cut that out. If you can cut that out and send them a new proof immediately and they sign off on it, that's the difference between getting it done then or waiting for the next call in a couple of days. So if you are at all, like if you're hitting any limits or your 3D model is so big that you're artificially keeping it small because you just can't access enough RAM to move it around in real time and adjust it the way you want it. Like if you are hitting those limits, now you have, twice the amount of room to hit those things in.
That's really cool. We've talked about this on the show before. The three of us, well, as much as we love Apple and we use Apple every day in and of our lives, the Mac Studio is a little much for, I think, each of us. It's not necessarily what we'd be looking for. But so having your expertise kind of with the products in hand and also with your actual workflow doing, YouTube videos and high rendering, high 4K files and things like that is really interesting to hear. We have some questions. We brought you on. We figured we'd pepper you with some questions from users, some from just us in general, because we like talking to you. So I'll start off with actually one from the live comments here. Stephen Huxtable was just wondering any downsides that you've noticed to the M1 or to the Mac Studio rather.
No, not really. I mean, for single threaded tasks, it's all the M1 family is the same. So if you're only hitting whatever your workload is, you're hitting one processor, it is the same on an M1 Mac Mini as it is on an M1 Pro MacBook Pro as it is on a M1 Max, M1 Ultra box. So, it can be massively overkill. But we all know, like, a bunch of YouTubers bought Mac Pros a couple of years ago. It didn't need them. Like, didn't come anywhere close to needing them. But it's that beautiful Instagram flex. So, like, if you're about that beautiful Instagram flex, you can do you. Otherwise, just for most people, it is overkill. The M1 is for 80% of Apple's customers. The Pro and Max are for another, 15%, and Ultra and whatever the Mac Pro gets are going to be for like 5% of the people. But it's nice that Apple's not forgetting about those people like they did for damn near a decade.
Rene, how's the connectivity with the new one? I know a lot of people were really excited about having ports on the front, which sounds very mundane, but for Apple users, that is a big deal. Have you found that as a welcome addition?
Yes. So with a caveat, like you only get the way that it works is the M1 Max chip has 3 Thunderbolt and 3 USB-C I/O controllers on it, which means that for the M1 Max version of the Mac Studio, you only have USB-C ports on the front. In order to get enough controllers to make those Thunderbolt 2, you have to go up to the M1 Ultra, which is a big step up. But then you can plug like a display or two in the front if you're Jonathan Morrison or you're somebody who really needs to do that. Otherwise, they're not HDMI 2.1, even though the HDMI 2.1 spec is entirely optional at this point. So nobody knows what it means anymore. Literally every advanced feature on it is now optional. So you can call HDMI 2.0, 2.1 if you want to. And the SD card maxes out at XC. It doesn't all go to UX, or is it XU? I forget. So it's like peak 2020 storage, not quite 2022 interfaces, but it works really good. And it's great to have that many ports on the Mac now. I will caution by say that if you are an actual pro, like you will never live a dongle-free life. Right now, I don't use SD cards anymore. I use CF Express cards, which means I need a dongle for that. And there's a bunch of other stuff that, like, if you have older pro gear, you might need to dongle it up. Or like it's just you're never going to really live a dongle-free life. So it's just nice to have a lot of ports that you can plug things into.
I hate that word dongle, by the way. I have a question.
Adapter-free life.
It's just, yeah, I know. So my question is, who do you see as the target audience for the Mac Studio and the Mac Display for that matter? And who do you not see as the target audience? Like, who do you think it's not for?
So I'll do the last one first because it's been by far the hottest, spiciest, toastiest of takes over the last 2 weeks. The Studio Display is super specific. Like Apple got out of making displays because they believed they were commodity items and you could go get them from a variety of vendors. But it turned out that most vendors had no interest in making Mac-specific displays, which sounds dumb. Like, why should a display be Mac-specific? But there's a certain percentage of Apple's customer base, primarily designers and developers, who really want what they call a native 2x display. And that means that it is exactly twice the pixel ratio, so that when you open apps, everything falls perfectly on a pixel grid. There's no sort of blurring where it tries to, like, it's on half a line, tries to make it look better. So when you get to 27 inches, that's 5K, and most screens were 4K, which meant they weren't ideal for their work conditions. Apple got LG to make one, but LG, like, the Wi-Fi didn't work or it interfered with the Wi-Fi the first time, and then it had just a bunch of quality control issues, and the industrial design was pedestrian at best. And so Apple got this idea that, maybe if we get back into it, we can do something differentiated. We could do something better. We could use an A13 chip, because we got a ton of those lying around. Sorry, an A13 Fry, Stephen, I think they call it. An A13 Fry. And they could put that in there, and they could offer all the features of like a MacBook display, like True Tone, the audio processing for the speakers, the video processing for the camera. Oh, that's really buggy right now. Siri parsing, so that if you have a Mac Mini or something without a mic, or your Mac is in a closet somewhere or across the room, it'll still handle all that. So it was a display that nobody else was making, and they released it, and a bunch of developers and designers, like the Mark Edward Bajango types of the world, loved it when bought it immediately. And then a bunch of people who would never have bought the LG, weren't annoyed that the LG was not quite what they wanted, got super, super mad about it. So I think, like, if you were going to buy the LG Ultrafine 5K and you had issues with it, or you didn't like the design, or just didn't have enough features, get this instead. It's like $300 more. Yes, the height doesn't adjust, and that sucks, but it's $200 more. It has way more features and way better build quality. If you were never going to buy the LG 5K, then just pretend it doesn't exist. It doesn't hurt you. It's not going to come to your house and stab you. Just buy a 4K display for $200 and be happy. And then the Mac Studio is just for people who would normally buy a Mac Mini, but they just need way more power. They just need way more performance, way more ports. And the same way they could throw a Mac Mini at all their production problems, mostly creative pros, people doing audio work, video work, developers, people who are doing high-end 3D work, anyone who's doing sort of what you'd call creative pro work. It's a Mac Mini on Hulk serum. It'll give you way more of what you want. So instead of buying like 4 of those and hoping to parallelize them, buy one of these, plug it in, you're happy.
Yeah, because you mentioned it, talking about that, one of the big things that came out of a lot of the reviews, and you mentioned it in your own too, about the studio display, was the lacking camera, which was kind of a bit shocking, because Apple's been doing really good on cameras for quite a while, and I'm right now, you can see I'm on the 24-inch iMac camera, which is what I kind of expected this one to sort of perform like. Apple has said, as you mentioned, that it's going to release some software updates that should help with some of the image processing that is apparently a bit buggy right now. But how much do you think that's actually going to help the image? Because software can't help a bad camera, right? It can make a good camera look better, but it can't really help a bad camera. So is it a camera problem, or are you confident that software is really the issue here?
It's two things. One, it's a camera trade-off on the hardware, because it's using an ultra-wide sensor to be able to do what Apple calls center stage, which is dynamic pan and scan, zoom in and out, so that it'll not just face track you, but if people come in or out of the frame, it'll also track them, get bigger if it needs to fit multiple people in, and then if they leave the frame, zoom back in on you. And that means it needs to have more image data. It needs to have a much wider sensor to be able to do all that, to be able to zoom out. But the problem is, first, ultra wide angle cameras are not as good as wide angle cameras at the same size with the same Z index. Unlike a normal lens, which can just get longer and longer to compensate, these are all stuck in displays, so they're very, very thin. They have very little Z index, so you're hampering the quality. The iMac has a regular 1080p camera in it, like a wide angle, not an ultra wide. So just atomically, it's going to be better. It's going to be better at everything. It's just it is a better camera at that size. Also, with this, you're chopping out the middle, which means you're not getting all the 12 megapixels anyway. You're just getting all the ones in the center, because it's using those to sort of keep everyone in the center of the stage. The other thing is, it looks like Apple's computational photography is messing up. It's essentially the exact same hardware as the current generation iPad. Nothing. It's just same camera, same A13 chipset, same image signal processor. It's all identical. So it should look as good as the iPad 9. There's no reason for it not to, and it doesn't. It's like flattening everything out. It's reducing all the shadows. It's like that Smoothgate controversy we had with the iPhone XS in its first few months, when people were complaining that it was like a beauty filter. And it turns out it was just, when Apple does long story, even longer. What Apple does to make up for the lack of big lenses is it uses big compute. So it takes like a ton of photos across a wide dynamic range and then stacks them and brackets them in order to pull out all the detail in the highlights and all the shadows. But the problem they had, and people complained about this, is it made it impossible to get shadows. They just exposed everything. So you couldn't even shoot a silhouette anymore. And that's what this is happening now. So instead of having like dark on one side of my face or under my hat, it's exposing that too. And faces are looking very, very flat, which along with like graininess and other things, they need to fix whatever is going wrong with that calculation. And then it'll be better quality.
Rene, you said about obviously the A13 chip in the display handles all of that camera computation and a bunch of other stuff, Siri, all that different things. I've seen a few people kicking about jokes. Oh, I'm going to jailbreak the studio display, or we should have the iPadOS software system on the studio display. Do you think there's any headroom with the chip in the studio display for it to do more in the future, or do you think it's kind of already doing everything that Apple wants it to do, minus a bit more camera computation, which hopefully coming soon?
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. So it runs iOS 15. I'm not sure if it runs iPadOS 15 specifically, because it is like basically Apple took an iPad 9 and shoved it inside an LG Ultra 5K. It can do more. Like what a lot of people are hoping, myself included, is that for people who ordered 2 of them, right now you have to pick one or the other as your target for like speakers. But it'd be nice if you could do something like the HomePod and make them a stereo pair, so it recognizes that you have 2 and then gives you a bigger 3D soundstage for all your audio. In what I would have loved is for Apple to have included wireless in here, like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, because then it could have done some really interesting things like AirPlay and Sidecar without having to have a Mac attached, which sounds dumb because like people are like, oh, you have a Mac attached, or you can just go plug it in. But just the idea of like, I have my MacBook and I just want to check a video on a bigger screen, or I'm over at Luke's house and he has his Mac Studio plugged in, but I just want to check something on a big screen. I can just walk up, press a button, I'm AirPlaying to it, all those sorts of things. Without like Apple's whole thing is we're going wireless. Since the 12-inch MacBook, we're going wireless, and would have loved to see them. We get updates on AirPods now. Like we've gotten a slew of new features on AirPods, everything from conversation boost to spatial audio to Find My. I love the idea of like every WWDC, they're like, and new to the studio display this year. But I think the lack of wireless kind of hampers it.
Mm-hmm. The other thing, I mean, you just mentioned it there actually. This has Apple praised the webcam. They were like, look at the webcam, it's great. It turns out the webcam in its current form is terrible. But also the speakers, they talked up a lot. And I've seen lots of people saying the speakers are actually excellent. How have you found the speakers? Are they as good kind of as everybody is saying they are? But equally, there are still limitations because it's a display. So what sort of level of speaker are we dealing with? Because I don't think people are going to be using the studio display to monitor, music production, for instance. I'm really curious about that.
Yeah, unless you are Jonathan Morrison, I'm always going to caveat that in. But yeah, Apple's been doing really well. Like Apple built this entire huge lab structure. Like they built such a big audio lab that people who have been to like Dolby Audio Lab say, damn, this is a big audio lab, where they have everything from like -2 or 3 decibel rooms to rooms that have walls that can move to replicate the 3D environments of other rooms that they've scanned, to rooms where they can test all the different audio things. And they do a ton of really cool stuff with audio. Like when you put your iPhone to your ear, it'll actually scan where it is compared to your ear and adjust the audio so that you can hear it as clearly as possible. And then there's all like the computational HomePod stuff that they've been doing. And this is the exact same thing. So it takes in audio sources up to and including Dolby Atmos, and then figures out how to make a 3D soundstage. It is limited in that like it's only yay wide. It's only 27-inch wide. So if you imagine like a current generation MacBook Pro or a current generation 24-inch iMac with about 1.5 inches, 2 inches of extra separation, and then just the volume you get from having more room to put bigger speakers and like 2 extra years of software development behind all that. So they sound better than the MacBook Pro, which already sounds terrific, and the 24-inch iMac, which also sounds terrific, but it's still coming at you from a speaker. It's not like you have a full Dolby, like 9-speaker system around you.
My final question from me, the other big criticism floating about in all the reviews and first impression hands-on of the studio display is the lack of 120 hertz refresh rate. Now, I didn't think that this would be as big of a deal as some people have made it out to be. And my understanding of it is that in its current form, 120 hertz refresh rate isn't physically possible with the new studio display. It just doesn't have the like the input hardware, and I don't even know what Macs have the output hardware to give it 120 hertz. So do you think that is an omission or something Apple's saving for a later date, or just something that in its current form just not enough of the customer base kind of has a need for it? Because I've always thought of the 120 hertz refresh rate as more of like a gaming and kind of application. So I'm curious did you find that to be like an omission as well, or what did you think?
No, it's gonna be a bit of a ridiculous answer because it's it's a $2,000 display, give or take, but it would be even more expensive. And not for like the obvious reasons. I think it's like everybody's like, why didn't they add this? Why didn't they add that? And like when you say that, you've got to start adding the price tag to all those things in your head. Like the perfect display for me right now would be mini LED, and it would be 120 hertz because I'm starting to work in high dynamic range. And also, when you have 120 hertz, it doesn't just scroll better, which is nice, but it's evenly divisible by 30, 24 frames per second. So you like 48 hertz, 60 hertz, so that you can actually edit. Like you can do that a little bit of that on this, but like if you want to edit like perfectly in every frame rate, the way nature and Hollywood intended, so I always say, then it's really nice to have those extra frame rates. And it does give you those sorts of benefits, but it would add to the price tag. On traditional DisplayPort 1.4, it can't handle 5K at 120 hertz. It can handle 5K at 60 hertz and 4K at 120 hertz. You can use display stream compression, and some people hate the idea of that because it's lossy compression. But like it's visually indistinguishable. It's like a JPEG. People will tell you they can see the difference. Science might argue with them, but what is science really anymore these days anyway? Apple could use that, and then there's enough bandwidth to do it. But the problem is you still need the panel. Like someone still has to make that panel, and LG right now makes this panel. So you would have to like use that. I believe the Pro Display XDR uses display stream compression too, because they're just horribly behind in pushing out new standards. Like this was announced 2 or 3 years ago, and it's still not. I mean, DisplayPort 2 was announced 2 or 3 years ago, and it's still not out. So you could do it. You could have a mini LED display, and you could have that panel that's capable of going like an IGZO panel that's capable of going from 10 to 120 hertz or from 24 to 120 hertz. But it is going to cost. It is going to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars more. And most designers and developers don't need it. They need P3 because P3 is what they're developing their interfaces in. So like as ridiculous it is to call this low end, this is the low endest that Apple could do. And you'll be able to get 120 hertz probably, but it might be 7K for 7K, come later this year.
Yeah, the discourse around the display, especially when it first came out and was first getting, going around with the reviewers and stuff, and we first had people with hands-ons, was really, really interesting. And I'm kind of with Steven too, where I'm like, I don't feel like 120 hertz is as big of a deal as some people make it out to be, but obviously there are people who disagree with that statement, and there are other displays out there for them. But in terms of 5K displays, maybe not quite yet. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future. And kind of piggybacking off that, do you think now that they have the Pro Display XDR and they have an Apple Studio display, do you think like Apple's getting back into displays more so? Like, do you think we might see like another version, or do you think these are just going to be there too, that they kind of, update periodically every few years or so? Or do you think that there's more coming down the pipeline perhaps?
More importantly, we have a question in the chat that you can answer too, is do you think Apple would ever get tired of LG and start just making its own display, kind of the same way it got tired of Intel, started making its own chips for the Mac?
Yeah. So again, I'll do them in reverse order. Apple Display is an amazing team. Like a lot of people think they just use Samsung panels or LG panels, but that's like they sort of just use TSMC's process to make the chips. They don't like manufacturing their own stuff. They prefer to design it and have someone else manufacture it for a variety of financial reasons. So when they spec out like an OLED panel for an iPhone, it sometimes uses different materials than Samsung's making for their own phones for that generation. And Samsung just has the capacity to make it. So Apple's like, this is what we want. They're like, okay, here you go. And then Apple Display takes it and does everything from like the burn-in mitigations to preventing off-axis color shit. Like all that stuff is done by Apple Display. And Apple has been working on their own sort of taking over more and more of it. I don't think they're going to ever have a large-scale factory that's owned and operated by Apple. I think they're always going to have like a Foxconn or a TSMC or a Samsung, because Samsung's not one company, it's a conglomerate, and Samsung Phones is a completely different company from Samsung Components. They just happen to buy from each other and have the license the same name. So people get confused by that. Same with LG. Like the LG phones are different from the LG like panel making. But they've been working on micro LED, which is still a couple of years away, but will be to OLED what mini LED is to LCD. So I think when we start getting closer to that, there's been rumors for a while now that Apple will take a much more active role, Apple Display, in doing all of that. We'll have to wait and see. The part about Apple getting back into displays, like one of the things that I find is still tough is you have people who hear facts and report facts about Apple, but they do it in the context of any other company. It's very typical in business publications. It's like Apple's doing this, therefore we will apply the same editorial filter or editorial narrative to it as if IBM was doing it or Microsoft was doing it, or Procter and Gamble. Like they literally have no difference. And these companies are really like Disney and Lego and Apple. There are certain companies like IKEA that are just fundamentally different. You can't just apply a vanilla, reporting formula to them. And I think that's what stymies a lot of this, because Apple Tim Cook has this doctrine where he says that Apple will only enter markets where they believe they can make a fundamental difference to that market in terms of like user experience and provide something of value, something that quote unquote only Apple can do. And that's why they got out of displays, because they didn't think there was anything for them to do. They were just panels at that point. Like routers are just router boxes at that point. And even though Apple's a huge company, their teams are still very small and they have very limited bandwidth. Like Apple's industrial design department isn't very big, but they have to make literally every Apple product every year. So they're going to do the iPhone, of course, just to flip an iPhone. And then they're going to do whatever else they have time for, which is usually like one iPad, maybe one or two Macs. So everything is fighting for that attention. And you've got to make a case. Like, what can we do here that's interesting enough that we're willing to sacrifice something else, like those industrial designers and those hardware engineers' time in order to do it? And a normal like 5K display isn't that. Like LG is making that. There's no reason for Apple to make that. But when you get to adding Apple Silicon to it and doing things like making it work the way a MacBook Pro display works or a MacBook display works, that's sort of when the only Apple thing comes back. And to that end, I think they made this display. And I think it's exactly what the people who've been waiting for Apple for 5 years to make a display wanted. So they did that. I think they'll do a new version of the Pro Display, because the Pro Display came out just before Mini LED. It's still traditional LED with a few local dimming zones. I think we'll get a new version of that with Mini LED. I really wish there was a Goldilocks model in the middle, because I don't need all the Pro Display XDR things, but I do want HDR. I don't think we're going to get it, though. I think we'll have the Studio Display and then the Pro Display. And the new Pro Display will be Mini LED and maybe 120 hertz, but it'll have the price tag to go with it.
Do you think if they do a Mini LED Pro Display, is there still going to be $1,000 stand?
I hope like one of those, like, it's one of those weird things where they get dunked on, and it's true. They make an expensive stand. Like, it's not like it's a cheap stand. Like, it's arguably like, just like in terms of what it took to make that, it's like priced, but like, do you need that? Like, do you need to make wheels that cost that much money? People will be perfectly happy with like, wheels that aren't quite that bougie. I think that's like the display, even on the Studio Display, like $400 for a height adjustable monitor. It's brilliant. It's freaking fantastic, but I don't need, like, it's just completely over-engineered. Just calm down a little bit, sit down.
Yeah, fair. All right, we are going to take a quick little break to hear about some of our friends. Karen, why don't you tell us?
Yes, we all hate passwords and are frustrated when we cannot remember a password, and we tend to reuse them. In today's world where everything is digital, this is akin to leaving your home and car unlocked. We all know we need to do a better job with our passwords. The time to do it is now. Get a password manager now. Get the best. Get Keeper. Start your free trial at www.get-keeper.com. Why Keeper? You can securely create, share, and manage passwords with family, friends, and colleagues. Highly rated, named PC Mag's Password Manager of the Year for 3 years in a row. Top-rated productivity app on the App Store. Most secure, multiple layers of security for maximum protection. Filling out forms is a breeze with patented autofill technology. Provides real-time alerts when passwords are compromised on the dark web. Store more than passwords. Store social security cards, passport photos, and more. It's also great for businesses. Provides all the features small and large businesses need, including integration with SSO systems, role-based access control, and secrets management. Sorry about that. That's it.
All right. Thank you, Karen, and thank you to
Keeper.
our sponsor. Yeah, there we go. Jesus, I completely blanked. I apologize. My brain is going a mile a minute here. If you're just tuning in, I don't know why you'd be doing that, but we're here with Rene Ritchie talking all about the Mac Studio M1 Ultra and kind of everything in between. We're going to shift gears a little bit, talk a little bit just about some generic or some general Apple rumors that we've been hearing this week. And one coming from Min-Chi Kuo that I believe was just this morning that we heard about was that Apple is now actively testing a 9-inch foldable device.
As opposed to passively testing, where Apple just makes a phone and leaves it in a room somewhere at Foxconn and it just sits and does whatever it likes. But yeah,
testing.
Yeah.
aggressively passive testing.
Yeah, definitely. This is a rumor from. So it started actually as a report from the Elec, which says that Apple has been working on some foldable devices. And then we got a report out from Quo today that says that Apple is actively testing a foldable OLED 9-inch panel. Now, he was quite non-specific about what he thinks this device is. It could be an iPhone, or it could be an iPad, or some sort of phablet hybrid. And he also was specific to say that Apple is testing this to see if the technology works. So we don't know if this is going to be the final form of the Apple sort of foldable that we've been hearing a lot about. But he went on to revise his prediction about foldable iPhones, and he reckons that we're going to get one in 2025 at the earliest, which lines up with another recent report from Ross Young over at Display Supply Chain Consultants, who said similar in terms of the time frame. But yeah, some sort of 9-inch OLED foldable that Apple is testing. And yeah, I'm still very skeptical about the foldable in general, so I don't know how I feel about this, but I guess it's exciting for somebody.
I'm excited to see it. What do you think, Rene?
Well, I saw you light up the minute you heard it. Like you did like almost like a Lori Gill style iPhone mini here, which was awesome. Ross and Guoming-Chi are both supply chain exfiltrators, which means they kind of have people sitting there watching what's coming off the line. So to me, those are very similar sources. And I always like it when you have different kind, like Mark Gurman is more like sources familiar with the matter inside Apple decided to reach out to me because they were super angry about what was served on the menu at Cafe Max today. So it's like, I like getting like a variety of different news sources because Apple tests everything. They have so much money and the ability to prototype and all the CNC machines that they can test anything that any blogger or YouTuber or podcaster could ever think of, and they probably did. I first heard about Apple Foldables in 2012. I think like they were already testing them back then because it just makes sense. Like we fold everything. We fold wallets. We fold sandwiches. We fold books. We fold it's just the history of human technology.
Laundry.
But the last we fold. Well, you fold your laundry. I kind of dump it in an clean pile. But like they're just looking at it. And the last I heard a couple of years ago is they thought the technology was still immature. It was like kindergarten, grade school, and Apple doesn't like to ship technology until it's like past high school. It graduated from high school. So it has a bunch of technical issues and technical hurdles that they want to overcome. And when it's ready, if it's still a market, because one of the things they do is they stop and look. Like they looked at a whole bunch of Trios and things before, and Blackberries and Windows mobile devices before they shipped the iPhone. And they looked at a bunch of tablet PCs before they shipped the iPad, and a bunch of like different watches before they ship the Apple Watch. They'll do that with like Samsung foldables and all the different ones coming out now. And if they think it's like a temporary fad, maybe they'll hold off. I think it's like a serious market. They're going to want to go into it with a mature product. It's like the exact same thing Samsung does, except instead of selling them for 3 years, they're testing them internally for 3 years.
Yeah, we've talked about this before in the show, but that is Apple's, modus operandi, that they really would like to wait until they have like a complete product that is like in their mind, like the perfection of whatever's kind of come before it. So I'm still interested in a foldable display. I think my most curious, the thing that has me most curious is for like a 9-inch display, let's say, if it's a foldable 9-inch display, I know this is, who knows what we'll actually get, but like, does it run iPad OS or does it run iOS?
It depends. Is it 9 inches folded or unfolded? Because that's
I would
'Cause if
assume
it's-
unfolded, because if it was folded, that'd be massive.
Maybe
that
it's
would be
9
in some sort
centimeters.
of- yeah,
Pretty awkward.
Maybe it's 9 centimeters.
that would be a huge L for
The Apple foldable.
Can we get an
Tamagotchi.
origami device where it's like it's an Apple Watch, you take it off your wrist and it unfolds into a phone, and then unfolds again into a tablet, then unfolds again into a laptop, then unfolds again into a display for your Mac Studio?
Right.
I have my 10. I'm looking at my 10.5-inch. Like, this is bigger than an iPad Mini,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah. So
Yeah, I think iPad Mini is 8.3, the display.
So imagine
New one.
folding that in half, and that's
Yeah.
I guess
And
what
being
we're-
able to unfold it again after, not like unbox.
yeah, and then not be a
Yeah.
huge crease down the middle of the display that you have to look at every time you use it. I think it's the interesting thing, because you say, oh, what kind of size and form, is that the rumor that Guo put out today was in the context of a rumor, and he mentioned it as well, that Apple is working on panels, foldable panels for tablets and laptops, a very open-ended kind of generic sort of rumor. And he says that he believes that Apple's priority is medium. Let me find it so I get this right. I get the right order. Is medium, large, and then small, which sort of you'd think iPad, Mac, and then down to iPhone, which so this presumably, because it seems like quite an early device in terms of the timescales we've heard, would be the iPad. Yeah, so you're talking about an iPad that you could make smaller, as opposed to a phone that becomes a lot larger than it currently is.
Like a John Prosser small, SMOL.
Well, interestingly, John Prosser did report actually last year that Apple was prototyping foldables and was going between, I guess you have the Galaxy Z Fold, the clamshell, and then the other one that closes and open like a book.
The flip and the fold.
Yes, exactly. So Apple has settled on the flip, which is the clamshell design for a phone at the very least. So
The Captain Kirk.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely curious to see kind of what form this would take. And then yeah, Luke, like you said, in terms of the software, I guess the good thing about iPad OS, it works on the Mini and the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. So there's a lot of range there in terms of what is user friendly, what is usable, what's nice to look at, what is not so small that you'd have to file your fingers down to like little points like Steve Jobs joked about back in the day. But
yeah, and I think I think as much as a lot of people are excited about foldables, and they are an exciting product, don't get me wrong, I still occasionally, when I'm in a cell phone store or I see somebody holding a Galaxy Flip or a Galaxy Fold, I'm still always like, oh, I kind of want to touch that. I want to get into it. I want to like feel it. I want to see what it's like to use. I've like a couple times there's been one in my cart somewhere on the internet. There's been one in my cart, but I haven't quite pulled the trigger yet. Because I too believe that it's not quite, the use cases for me personally it's not quite up to where I would like it to be. But they are
You guys
exciting.
spend a weekend with Michael Fisher. He'll teach you. He'll learn you.
Right. Yeah, totally. They are really exciting though. And I do prefer the like the clamshell, for a phone. I prefer the clamshell kind of like design rather than the more like foldable book design.
I think I'm the same, because the clamshell, say for a phone, it would make it much smaller, which is a tangible benefit of having the foldable phone. Is it literally half the size from the in hand and you put it in a pocket or a bag, whereas like the book, it doesn't, even when you fold it, it's still massive. It's not more convenient to look after. So.
And it just reminds me of the flip phones of the past, which gives me a good nostalgia hit, since like my first few cell phones were all flip phones before I got into the smartphone business.
I had the old, do you remember that ZTE flip phone? And it had the camera in the hinge, but it was like a barrel, so you could roll it, so it was front and back. I had one of those back in the day.
Oh, that's so funny.
When I was 17, probably.
For anyone listening on this side of the pond, in the UK they say Z instead of Z. So
did you say ZTE? That is
Canada says Z too, Karen. You're in the minority on the show.
Yeah.
Oh, in Canada you say Z also?
Yeah.
Z's sort of the official pronunciation, but because we are a very Americanized culture from being
inundated with American media.
It's definitely said both ways, but like technically Z is the correct proper pronunciation.
Yeah, but you will
Z,
never hear that in the US.
Yeah.
But if you say Z here, Ryan Reynolds shows up really quickly and kicks you. So you have to be very careful.
Yeah. And he has a soccer team now, so he knows how to kick. So
that was just a complete tangent, but that Ryan Reynolds 1Password commercial was so many worlds colliding for me. That's not something I ever thought I would see.
And you know what? It was delightful. I'll say this. I got up that morning, and when it came out, I was like, I have no idea what in the heck world we're living in, but we're living
Did you wake up in the Spider-Ham universe? That's what I thought right away.
Yeah.
Which Earth is this?
Spider-Ham.
Yeah.
So you can see in the comments that Americans are incredulous that Z is actually a thing.
Oh, well.
It sounds different than C, so you don't get confused as much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm just telling you, we don't use it at all in the US ever.
It's funny up here in Canada because like I said, it's kind of interchangeable, although Z is the professional pronunciation. But you've heard me say Z. I'm pretty sure I just said Z with
Do you
the
still
Galaxy.
put use in your
I'm
words,
pretty sure.
Luke, when you're writing?
I mean, I don't on iMore, but I do in my own life.
I feel like Canada's like halfway in between.
We are totally are, because we put U's in words, but we don't switch them to S's the way the UK would. We leave them as Z's, like in America, Z's, like in America. But I was actually once with I think it was WWDC, or it was one of the Apple events, and I walk into a hotel with a very happy John Gruber, and we're walking by the Canadian Apple PR team. And I introduced him to John because he's not familiar with the Canadian PR team. And John just looks at him and goes, "What are you guys doing? Just sticking all the U's back in the press releases?"
Yeah.
I take it he never heard from them again. Is that
what? That's the moral of the story.
They didn't need him for any hot Canadian launches.
Yeah. Moving on to yet another quick iPhone rumor is that the under display Touch ID that we've heard lots about and has speculated will eventually come to iPhone is apparently been delayed until 2025.
I think it's dead. I think we're done. Touch RIP, not Touch ID. I think is the Again, this is another rumor from Mingqi, or a report, who says his latest survey, whatever that means, indicates the new phones in both 2023 and 2024 may not adopt under-display Touch ID, which would put it back as far as 2025. And the reason he gave for that was Face ID with a mask, which has been successful as a biometric solution for unlocking your phone, so we don't need Touch ID, which I thought was strange because I was never under the impression that Face ID coming back to iPhone was about masks or the pandemic, because I feel like we were talking about it before the pandemic.
Touch ID coming back.
Yes, of course. Sorry, Touch ID. Yep. It's just I'd always been under the impression that Touch ID sort of left because the new form factor, you get rid of the chin and the forehead, but there's nowhere to put your finger. But maybe one day when we can have a finger and the scanner under the display, then that would be a really good solution. I used the Huawei P40 Pro when that came out a couple of years ago, and that had a under display Touch ID, well, not Touch ID, but a fingerprint scanner, and it was incredible. I loved it alongside facial recognition. So I'm a little confused by this. Obviously it seems much further away than we thought, but I'm mostly baffled by the Face ID with a mask kind of caveat, which I didn't really think was relevant to the conversation.
Well, what I think is confusing is that the Touch ID on the button works so well on the iPad. So why do we need an under display? I mean, Rene, do you think, is there an advantage to an under display Touch ID as opposed to just using the button?
I'm still coping with the fact that Stephen didn't say Touch ID ED. The obvious gag. Well, I think originally people were just exploring that as a technological solution. I have the Pixel 6 Pro, and it's like people make fun of it because it takes a little while for the in-display Touch ID to work. But I just do a moment of zen, like on my Apple Watch, whenever I try to unlock the phone, and it's fine. Get a little deep breathing in. It was one of those things where I think it's cool tech, and people explore cool tech, but the reason that I'm upset about it is I want to go post, like right now we have very active authentication. Like you have to touch the button to authenticate. You have to look at the phone. And that's like, it sounds stupid. That's too much work. Like I shouldn't be working for my phone. It should be working for me. So I want the phone to have a ton of biometrics. I want it to have Touch ID and Face ID and Voice ID off Siri and the gait analysis that they debuted last year for like, is it you walking? I want it to have all those things. and then just glance at me all the time, like get a bit of my face, a bit of my touch, a bit of my walk, a bit of my voice, and then know that it's me and just be unlocked. So I don't have to do anything. And then if for some reason it's not sure, it can challenge me and say, your phone's like an unknown state, please touch ID or face ID or something to get in. But just the whole idea of me having to prove myself to the stupid phone every time I want to use it feels like so old century. And I'm ready for like that phone needs to get a job and start doing this for me.
Yeah, I think just ideally it would be nice. I don't care if it comes under the display, if it comes in the side button, which like I agree, as I've been using the Touch ID in the power button on the iPad Air 5. Like I think that's a great solution. I just like the idea of having more options. You know what I mean? Because there are situations where I find Face ID a little annoying to activate, and it's much easier just to like not even have to look at my phone and just be able to hit the button and kind of, you know, go about my business and get it unlocked and things like that. So I think that, you know, I think Face ID is great. I'm happy that they got it to work with masks, because I think that was sort of important, especially in recent years. So it's nice that technology is there. But I think like just having both, just give users more options is always like the best way to go. So whether it comes under display or in the side button, like I don't care, just get it back on the phone. I just think it'll be good for people.
I didn't answer Karen's question. The reason that they want it under display is that Apple, there's different versions. There's optical, which is what like Google and some other people use, and that means it just uses a camera, so it needs to be like enough light and things like that. And then there's Qualcomm's, which is sonar, which is like sonic based. And Apple was working on an acoustic version that's very similar to Qualcomm's, and they also have a licensing deal with Qualcomm. But it would basically be the whole bottom of the display, so you wouldn't have to think about Touch ID. It's not like do you even really use the power button on your iPhone when you wake it up? Most people probably don't. They just pick the phone up, and this way you would just pick it up, and as you touched it to start doing something, it would unlock. So it wouldn't feel like you had to go out of your way to press a button to unlock it.
That makes sense.
Rene just broke news that I'm going to have to write about next week sometime, but we'll leave that. Was that public information about the acoustic and the bottom half? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's probably on like Apple patents everything in part because they want to be able to sue other people, but also like if they patent a million things, then you don't know which one they're actually working on.
There's always a patent, isn't there?
There's always a patent.
I had a really profound thing to say, and Rene said that, and I forgot it. I've remembered. I was going to say, I think it's not the side button, top button, because most people tend to use their phones in cases, and most people tend to use their iPads not in cases. And so you got an iPad in a case, you can't use the top button. Same with the phone. So that would be my guess as to why.
No,
I just work here. I don't
use my iPad in a case. I always use a case for my iPad.
Does it cover the button though?
Yeah.
No, it doesn't cover the button. I mean, it. Oh, you're right. The buttons are covered.
Yeah, there are quite a few iPhone cases that don't cover the buttons though. Although they usually have indents, so you can access the button, and like I wonder how that would play with Touch ID.
Well,
so I guess there's there is consideration there.
Yeah, I mean, they just would all go to a cutout type case. If that was if the biometrics are in the buttons, they're just gonna leave those open from now on.
Yeah, totally.
They just wouldn't make cases like this where
except for the rugged cases where you would just have to live without it.
Yeah. Right. Which then again, if you have a rugged case, you still have Face ID, right? So at least there's two different ways of activating it.
Unless you ruggedize the whole screen. Yeah. Type in like an animal.
All right. To end off the show, we're going to talk about something just a little fun and a little more personal. So just last week, I believe, was the 5th anniversary since Apple took over workflow, which if anyone knows, that eventually became shortcuts. That's what we kind of got out of that. And shortcuts has really evolved in the last few years. And when they put in automations, I think was really huge. And I think for people who really like to be able to kind of stream their whether it's workflows or whether it's lights that they have in their house, like everything's getting more connected and we're getting more smart. So we wanted to take a bit of time just to talk about maybe 1 or 2 shortcuts that we use kind of in our daily lives. Shortcuts or automations, just to sort of celebrate the workflow anniversary. So I'll quickly start off here. I found one recently, actually, that I think is pretty neat. I don't use a ton of shortcuts or automations yet because I don't have a lot of HomeKit stuff, but I use this automation that automatically changes my Apple Watch face by time. You can set it up two different ways. You can set it up by time. So it's like every evening I can have a darker watch face, at 7 o'clock, it goes to a darker watch face. So it's a little less bright when I look at my phone or when I look at my watch. Or you can do it by location. So I can set a location, for example, the gym. And when I get to that location, it'll ask me if I want to switch my watch face. You hit yes, and then boom, you can have like all your favorite activity watch face up. Or if you if you leave for work and you go to the office, you want one that's like specific for your work day. And I thought that was really, really cool. The differences I've noticed, the time one will happen automatically. It doesn't ask you at all. Like you can turn off the like ask when you run this automation, but with the location one, it will ask you. There's no option yet to like completely have it automatic, but it's pretty nice if like I think the gym is the biggest use case that I found for it so far is like, if I'm going to go work out, which right now is mostly just like running outside. So like whenever I leave my building, my apartment building, it'll give me a little notification and I hit yes. And then I have my running activity going, or the watch face I like to use for running up, and it's great. You can check that out on iMore. I have an article showing you how to do it. So feel free to go there. Rene, we didn't tell you this was happening, but I got to imagine you have some shortcuts that you use pretty often.
He might not even have heard of shortcuts. You never know. That would be something.
No, I have one that whenever Luke goes to the gym, it changes his height to 9 feet tall, so he gets twice the stride impact on his steps. No, I don't. Well, I used to use a lot more, but since 2020 happened and I haven't really left the house, I used to have them set up for coffee orders and all sorts of like cool stuff. I had one that Matthew made up for me where when it sensed my HomeKit door unlocking, it would play the Imperial March, so I could feel like I was Vader coming into a room. Like there's just all sorts of fun, but the ones I use now are so kind of pedestrian. Like I have one because some people have switched to Google image formats on the web, and for some reason you still can't import those into Photoshop. It's like they won't play nicely together. And Apple does have a built-in one, but it makes you like it destroys the resolution on the image every time you use it unless you switch the settings. So I just have one that takes those and converts them into PNG files, so I can load them into Photoshop or I can pull them into another editor. So it's stuff like that. It's just little things that I don't want to have to do manually anymore. It goes back to that. I think it was Micah Sargent who said like if you do it 10 times, make a shortcut. And that's what I kind of do to stay sane. Fair.
Karen, how about you?
Well, first of all, Rene mentioned Matthew, and I was going to mention him also. Matthew Casanelli is a freelancer at iMore, and I believe he was one of the original engineers at Workflow.
Yeah,
right?
He was their marketing.
Created
their marketing person.
Okay, yeah, so he was part of that Workflow team that became Shortcuts. So he is our resident Shortcuts expert. And if you search shortcuts on iMore, you'll see a ton of articles about shortcuts, and many of them are his. But anyway, I don't say I use shortcuts a ton, but I have a few that I want to highlight. I use the Carrot Weather app, and there's a whole bunch. Like you can say, is it going to rain? You can say, hey Siri, is it going to rain? And Carrot will give you the full rain report. Or you can say extended forecast and get weather for the next several days, or weather report to get an hourly forecast, things like that. There's some cool stuff that I really should use more that I haven't used in a while, like home screen icon creator. So like if you have a favorite person that you call a lot or text a lot, you can actually create an icon of their face and put it right on their home screen. So you just tap that person's face, or whatever, you personalize it however you like. So I don't know. I have a bunch.
Do you have a Siri Make It Rain that just has money you throw out of your HomePod? Is that one? I love
that would be ideal. Let's get on that one, Rene.
Okay.
How about you, Stephen? Using any shortcuts or automations?
Yeah, I don't have many. The ones that I have, and this is actually a really cool feature or a use for shortcuts and Siri, is I have these lights from a company called Govee. Have you seen the TikTok with the TV lights and the Marvel pre-roll and the red and the blues and stuff? It went viral like last year or the year before. I have those lights. We have them for our TV in the main living room, and I also have some cool. I have like the Govee like bars and one Govee lamp, and they all work interconnected over Wi-Fi, but they're not HomeKit compatible. So I can't say to my HomePod the magic words and then please turn on the lights or turn them off or whatever. So I use Siri to trigger a shortcut that goes into the app and either turns the lights on if they're on, or turns them off if they're on, and vice versa. So in here I've got, lights on and lights off. That just brings on all of my desk lights, and then in the living room we have TV on and TV off, and that's just a really easy way to control the lights, almost not through HomeKit, but in a way that, if you don't have HomeKit as an option, it works really well. So but those are the only ones. I should probably dive more into it, because I'm sure there are a lot that would make my life easier, and I'll be really upset when I find out there's things I've been doing for ages that I could have had a shortcut to do for me instead. Like take use out of words that I write on iMore.
Yo Siri banter, is that what you mean?
Steven, do you really say please when you're talking to Siri?
I mostly swear at Siri because of my strong regional Northern English accent. Yeah,
that's very British of you.
I say please and thank you because Georgia Dow told me that you have to treat everyone with respect.
Which is not a bad moral, to be honest.
I also would love to know and I know I'm being hyper UK sensitive on this podcast, and I apologize, but do you have a Siri shortcut where you just say manners maketh the man, and then Siri locks everything and beats the stuffing out of whoever's in your house?
Yeah.
Just a tuxedo emerges from the wall that I have to put on
with a Brawley of Doom. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Brawley. That's a great word. Brawley. Well done.
Steven,
I was going to say, I mostly just swear at Siri because I say something such as stop the timer, and Siri says, for how long? And
I asked Siri for directions to Toyota, and it gave me Toyota in Bluth, North Dakota or something. It's so easy to fix.
Yeah. It's the struggle is, I know Apple does work with, regional accents, but I don't think they sent anyone from the hills of Cumbria to Cupertino to figure out what exactly was being said. So the struggle is real.
I have the exactly generic accent, so I have no trouble getting Siri to understand me. But I know it is a problem.
I'm surprised you aren't one of the Siri voices, Karen. It's considering all of the projects and stuff you end up.
Did Siri ever fix for Jammy Dodger and Chip Buddy, or is that still a joke commercial 10 years later?
I have no idea.
Oh, you never saw Siri in Scotland, that famous commercial?
No, might have come out before I was born, so
it might have. It's just a poor Scottish guy is asking for a Jammy Dodger, and Siri is losing his mind. And then just give me a Chip Bati, and Siri is just not having any of it.
Really quickly before we sign off here, Steven, if you want to quickly remind all of our listeners about the giveaway that we
are giving away Rene Ritchie's hat. We are not, sadly, but we are hosting a giveaway here on the podcast and over at iMore.com. We're giving away some amazing prizes from Grid Studio. We talked about this last week, but very briefly, they make incredible bits of artwork out of old recycled iPhones and nostalgic games consoles, and they very kindly agreed to team up with us, give away a bunch of prizes. So all you have to do to enter, there'll be a link to the giveaway in the podcast description. Go in there, fill out the form, do the things. The more things you do, the more entries you get. You've got 2 weeks left. The giveaway started last week and it's 3 weeks. So a couple more weeks to enter, and it's totally free and being with a chance of winning some amazing prizes.
Yeah, so definitely check that out. That pretty much wraps up our show for today. I would love to thank everybody in the comments who's been listening to us live and kind of giving us feedback and giving us questions and joking around with us. We really appreciate it. Also, if you're listening to this later in your podcatcher of choice, we also appreciate you. We love doing this show for you, and feel free to tweet at iMore. If you have any questions, if you want us to talk about anything, we're always open to suggestions and love hearing from our listeners. Obviously, huge thanks to Rene Ritchie for coming on the show. Rene, where can people find you? Where can they find the stuff you're doing these days?
We want your address. That's
Box yourself.
We're going to show up at your door.
Well, I'm in Canada, right? There's only like 2 or 3 of us here. Just come to Canada. You'll find us.
Me and Rene are like 2/3 of the population, I'm sure.
Building, that's you're trying to survive the flying hockey pucks and polar bears. It's every winter. You can find me at youtube.com/Rene Ritchie or twitter.com/Rene Ritchie. I'm incredibly boring or incredibly consistent, depending on how generous.
No, that just means you've got excellent branding, which
definitely not boring. Go check out Rene's videos. He's killing it over on YouTube. They're fantastic. If you really want like good Apple analysis that really breaks down what Apple's moves mean to consumers, Rene is like top tier when it comes to that. So we really appreciate you coming on the show. Lastly, I want to give a quick thanks to our awesome audio editor, Jim Metzendorf, for always making us sound so good. And until next time, it's been the iMore show, and it's been a blast. We'll see y'all later. Bye.
Boy.
All right. Bye.